the collapse of the agricultural workforce and the growth of urbanization. Right, so before I do that story, any questions or queries from all of this stuff, or have I hammered you into submission? No? Yeah. Pretty striking. Pretty striking. You could switch out Germany and the US for China and India. You could have who would be the equivalent of Walter Bagehot writing about finance markets and their vulnerability, their sort of miraculous power, but also their striking vulnerability. Someone like George Soros, someone like that. I mean, there are a lot of parallels to not only the current position of the global economy, but of the position of the US in it. And I'm not even talking about all the dirty little colonial wars that Britain was fighting at this point. Okay, so let me do the urban revolution thing, and I'm going to do it in these 4 headings. We're going to talk about the scale of the process. I'm going to talk about why it was that cities came to be emblems of both a sign of progress and a sign of radical internal decay and poverty. We'll talk about the way in which the countryside, now that it no longer is seen as a place of production, becomes to be seen as a site of leisure and of consumption. And then I'll talk about the way in which urban planners and urban reformers wanted to try and bring the country increasingly into the city. Okay? So we're talking in a way about a reverse process. Yeah? In the early part of the 19th century, the great big burgeoning industrial cities seemed to be where it was at, where wealth was generated, where the forward march of progress was evident. By the end of the 19th century, people are more and more concerned about cities as forms of social decay, and are interested in the countryside as being the sign of civilization that had to be brought back into the city. I think I gave you these figures pretty much in an earlier lecture, but they bear repeating. And their point, because I'm not going to read them out to you, the point here that I'm trying to make is that Britain becomes a predominantly urban society in the 19th century, but it's really this period from 1871 to 1901 that the most dramatic shift happens. By 1911, just 25% of a population of 45 million was rural. And 40% were living in towns and cities of over 100,000. It's a radical transformation. And as I said to you earlier, this was built upon, for the first time, an actual fall in the numbers of people living in the countryside. Rural depopulation for the first time. Now, I said just before I started moving into this section that in the early 19th century, British cities were seen, the new industrial cities were seen to be the great engines of wealth and of the forward march of progress. Do you think any more, they could actually generate more noise if you wanted to try and design a classroom where there was as much noise as possible going outside? Do you think this was what it would look like? I think maybe I'm going to need a megaphone to be heard. Am I still? You can still hear me at the back there. Bells, helicopters, drilling. What else could they add into the mix here? Turn up the mic. Yeah, I can't imagine. Anyway, so I said at the beginning that early. I'm sorry, now I'm just really distracted by it. The cities in the first half of the 19th century were seen as these great engines of wealth and of progress. Is this fair? Is this what Engels is writing about in his account of that foul swamp that was Manchester in 1844? What is it that he's saying about Manchester? Is he celebrating Manchester as a great sign of industrial progress? This was one of the very quick and easy readings to read. So what's he saying? You're nodding your head. Man with a beard. And why is it why atrocity? I'm not sure if atrocity is a bit of a strong word, isn't it? It's a very fair city, really. A city of horror, but of what particular type of horror, Rebecca? Filth. And what type of filth? Poop? Delicately put. What other type? So we have poop. Blimey, what are we, 5? Yeah. Right. Complete overpopulation. These dense little courts and alleys of slums. Right? Say that again. Right. It's chaotic, it's unplanned, it's haphazard, it's just sort of grown up in a bizarre way. What else? Yeah. What's your name? Sorry. Elizabeth. Right. Yeah. They're discrete areas of filth. And they're discrete areas of filth in which are rendered filthy not only by the people who are, here comes the helicopter again, by the people who are involved in the forms of production, but by the forms of production themselves, yes? So that you get, the effluent that comes out of tanneries. And if any of you know, do you know what a tannery is? Tell them what a tannery is. Right. And it stinks. It is, if you've ever been into a tannery, well, these days they're fine, but in the old days, it reeks, it's like dead flesh that you're trying to render into leather, okay? Chemicals spewing out of everywhere, effluent. This is the Manchester, okay? This is the social consequences of industrialization that Engels is writing about. And 40 years later, Booth is saying pretty much the same thing, is he? Is it the same thing that Booth is saying in Darkest England? Someone's talking to me, I can't see whether... Was it you?
Yeah. Yeah, he's saying, well, he was comparing it to kind of the horrors in Africa, how England is also kind of having all these social problems.
Right. So England, in Darkest England, is equated to the darkest forests of Africa, Africa, the big, scary continent. But is it because they have the same forms of industrial overpopulation and pollution? Is that why England has suddenly become like darkest Africa? No. So what is it about? What makes England so irredeemable, or not irredeemable, because he thinks he can redeem it? Right. Perfect. So the point here is that the conditions in which people live have produced a demoralized people. Okay? So what happens in the 19th century is, if you like, the emergence of a type of environmental determinism, okay, in which people increasingly get associated with the conditions in which they live. Okay? Now, you've seen this already, because you've seen this in the form of the great sanitary movement. Yeah? You've seen this in Chadwick believing that if you introduce sanitary systems, you'll improve the morals and the civility of the urban population. And indeed, that sanitary movement, that development of all those massive engineering projects to introduce sewers and running water, was part of the celebration of liberal progress. Okay? So it's a flip side. There are two things operating here side by side. The attempt to engineer the city into a site of civility, and the constant recognition that that project is confronting its own failure to produce a healthy, transformed, civil, urban population. In contrast, you have the increasing valorization of the countryside. And I'm suggesting to you that one of the reasons why the countryside becomes seen as the place of health and of civility and of sort of moral purity is because it's no longer, increasingly, it's no longer seen as a place of production. So here you have this fantastic image produced by the Salvation Army of the deep, dark horrors of the city, and the attempt to elevate people by putting them out onto farm colonies, which puts them in a light place closer to God. Okay? This image dramatically illustrates precisely the process that I want to talk about. So how then does the countryside become seen as a site of consumption? Well, a key part of the story here is the growth of the internal rail network and the increasing fall of ticket prices that enabled more and more people to travel beyond their localities and to regions, to basically turn the countryside into a tourist destination for the first time. Okay? It meant that there were certain areas of Britain that became associated with rural tourism. Anyone want to give me a guess of some of those areas? Darren? The seaside, absolutely. And any particular seaside? Right. Brighton, Blackpool, Scarborough. You're going to say Brighton? Lake District, brilliant. Lake District. Anyone else? It's only the Brits talking because only we know. The Lake District, and of course the Southwest.